London, 1847. A woman has spent her entire life meticulously groomed to become a duchess. But on the morning of her wedding, the duke she was promised to returns from war and chooses her younger sister instead. The morning of April 17th, 1847, dawned with a thick London fog that clung to the windows of Isabella Munro's bedchamber like ghostly fingers. The mist seemed to hold the world in suspension, as if nature itself were holding its breath for the momentous day ahead. In the east wing of the Munro estate, servants had been bustling since before dawn, carrying heated water for the bride's bath, pressing linens, and arranging flowers that had arrived from the Richmond hothouse the previous evening. The air inside the chamber, however, was still and quiet, filled with the scent of jasmine and the faint, nervous rhythm of a ticking clock. Isabella stood perfectly still before the ornate looking glass as her lady's maid. Martha secured the final pearl buttons of her wedding gown. The creation was a masterpiece of ivory silk, imported from Lyon and Belgian lace, so delicate it appeared to float around her slender figure. 6 months of work by London's finest seamstresses had culminated in this garment, designed to transform a nobleman's daughter into a duchess. Isabella's reflection showed a woman of 26 years. Her chestnut hair had been arranged in an elaborate style beneath the veil, adorned with orange blossoms and small pearl pins. A modest application of rouge colored her cheeks, and the slight tremble of her gloved hands was the only outward sign of her inner turmoil. She was poised and elegant, with features that were pleasant if not striking. A straight nose, clear grey eyes, and a mouth that naturally curved into a serious expression. Martha, whispering, her voice thick with emotion, "You look absolutely radiant. Miss Isabella." Martha had been with her since Isabella was 7 years old, and the maid's eyes glistened with maternal pride as she carefully arranged the delicate veil over Isabella's hair. She stepped back to admire her handiwork, her hands clasped before her apron. "Isabella," softly, her voice barely a whisper, "Thank you, Martha." Isabella studied her reflection with critical eyes. The woman who gazed back at her was the culmination of her 22 years of existence. Today, Lady Isabella Munro would finally become the Duchess of Richmond, fulfilling the destiny laid out for her before she could even speak her first word. Isabella, V.O. I have prepared for this day my entire life. Indeed, she had. Since the moment her father, Lord William Munro, and the old Duke of Richmond had shaken hands over her cradle, sealing her fate with a marriage contract written on parchment and bound with the seals of both houses. Isabella had been molded for this role. Every lesson, every skill she had acquired was meant to prepare her to stand beside one of England's most powerful dukes. She had mastered French by age 10, adding Italian and German by 15. She could play Beethoven's most challenging sonatas with technical perfection, if perhaps less passion than her music master might have wished. Her watercolor landscapes had been praised by Royal Academy artists, and she could recite from memory the complex hierarchies and subtle nuances of proper etiquette that governed aristocratic society. And somewhere along the years of preparation, the young girl's dutiful acceptance had blossomed into a timid affection. She had met Edward Richmond only a handful of times, always in strictly chaperoned settings, formal dinners, a garden party at his country estate, once at the opera in London, where he had commented favourably on her French. His dignified demeanour and occasional kind words had been enough for her romantic heart to weave elaborate dreams around. In the privacy of her journal, she had practiced signing her new name, Isabella Richmond, Duchess of Richmond. The elegant script was a testament to her hidden excitement. The heavy oak door to the chamber swings open. A stern, imposing man in his late 50s stands in the doorway. He is immaculately dressed in formal morning attire, his expression one of satisfaction rather than paternal affection. "This is Lord William Munro, Lord Munro," voice booming from the doorway. "The carriage awaits." "Miss, your father is ready to escort you." Isabella took a deep breath, steadying her nerves, Martha whispering, as she carefully drapes the floor-length veil over her face. "You'll make a fine duchess, Miss Isabella. The finest Richmond has ever seen." Isabella gave her a small, tight smile. Isabella to her father as she offers him her arm. "Yes, father?" Lord Monroe, his usual greeting, replacing any fatherly words of tenderness or pride. "Today you fulfill your duty to our family." The marriage would cement the Monroes' place in society, bringing their merchant wealth into the aristocratic fold through an alliance with one of England's oldest titles. Isabella. In her mind, a secret joy. Yes, father, for her today was about more than duty or family advancement. It was about beginning her life with Edward, the man who had occupied her thoughts for years. XT, London streets, int. Carriage, morning. The carriage journey from the Monroe estate to St. George's Church in Hanover Square took 20 minutes. The morning fog had begun to lift, revealing glimpses of the lush April countryside coming into bloom. Inside the carriage, Isabella sat, perfectly composed, her hands clasped in her lap. Martha sat opposite, her expression still misty-eyed with emotion. "Martha, you look so beautiful, my lady." "The Duke." He will be speechless. Isabella, softly, a faint smile on her lips. "I hope so." She remembered the Duke's eyes, a cold, distant blue, but in her dreams they were filled with warmth and affection. She had convinced herself that beneath his formal exterior lay a man of great depth and kindness. She thought of the gifts he had sent. Formal notes, expensive jewels, never a personal heartfelt sentiment. But that was simply the way of their world, she reasoned. Affection was not a prerequisite for a successful match. Her duty was to be a dutiful wife, a gracious hostess, and a mother to his heirs. Her one small desire was to be seen, truly seen, by the man she was to marry. She had given him her future, her life, and her hope. Isabella looked out the window. London bustled with horse-drawn carriages, gentlemen in top hats, and ladies with parasols, all unaware that she was travelling toward a life sentence. Her gaze drifted to her father, sitting in the opposite corner of the carriage, his face set in a look of grim satisfaction. He too was a man of duty. He had raised her to be a valuable asset, and today that asset would fulfill its purpose. The carriage turns a corner and the church looms ahead. Its neoclassical facade is imposing against the grey spring sky. A crowd has gathered, eager to witness the social event of the season. The marriage of Henry Lancaster, the Duke of Westmore, London's most eligible bachelor, to the daughter of an impoverished Viscount. A footman opens the carriage door. Lord Monroe helps Isabella descend. Lord Monroe, whispering, "Courage, my dear." Isabella clutches her father's arm as they stand at the entrance. The air is thick with the buzz of gossip, the hushed whispers of London's elite. The cream of English society had gathered to witness the union of two great houses. Isabella's heart raced beneath her tightly laced corset. Through the crowd, she sees the Duke of Wellington himself, hero of Waterloo, ascending the chapel steps. Cabinet ministers, peers of the realm, even distant royal cousins, all had come to see Isabella Monroe fulfill the promise made at her birth. The chapel doors swing open to reveal the interior, transformed by hundreds of white roses and burning tapers. The assembled guests, nearly 300 of England's elite, rise to their feet as the string quartet begins the wedding march. The ancient stone walls seem to hold their breath as Isabella takes her first step down the aisle on her father's arm. Her gaze is fixed on Edward's broad shoulders at the altar ahead. He stands tall and proud in his formal attire, his aristocratic profile handsome against the backdrop of stained glass windows depicting his ancestors' military victories. The morning light filters through the coloured glass, casting a multicolored glow upon the scene. Isabella is halfway down the aisle when she notices her 17-year-old sister, Charlotte, seated in the front row. The younger Monroe daughter looks particularly lovely, in a gown of pale blue silk that complemented her fair colouring. her golden curls arranged fashionably beneath a hat adorned with forget-me-nots. Charlotte catches her eye and smiles, but there is something in that smile, a knowing gleam perhaps, or a hint of secretive triumph that makes Isabella's step falter momentarily. Lord Monroe's grip on her arm tightens, urging her forward. The last few steps to the altar seem to stretch endlessly as Isabella's heart pounds with anticipation. Finally, they reach the front of the chapel, where the elderly vicar waits with an open prayer book. Lord Monroe places Isabella's hand on the prayer book, symbolically giving his daughter to the church and to her husband. As Isabella takes her place beside the groom, Edward finally turns to face her. She expects to see warmth in his eyes, perhaps even admiration, as he beholds his bride for the first time on their wedding day. Instead, his expression is cold, distant, and determined. A chill that has nothing to do with the stone chapel's perpetual coolness runs through Isabella's veins. The vicar clears his throat, preparing to speak the first words of the marriage service. The wedding march swells to a beautiful crescendo as the organ fills the church with music. Isabella looks at Edward, a silent question in her eyes. Edward's gaze is fixed on Charlotte, seated in the front row. His expression resolute. He opens his mouth to speak. Fade to black. The wedding march swells, the organ music filling the vast stone chapel. The vicar, an elderly man with an open prayer book, stands ready. Isabella's heart pounds with anticipation as she stands beside the groom, her gaze fixed on Edward. He finally turns to face her. She expects to see warmth in his eyes, perhaps even admiration, as he beholds his bride for the first time on their wedding day. Instead, his expression is cold, distant, and determined, a chill that has nothing to do with the stone chapel's perpetual coolness runs through Isabella's veins. Before the vicar can speak the first words of the marriage service, Edward raises his hand in a gesture of interruption. Edwardi must address the congregation. Isabella stands frozen, still clutching her bouquet of white roses, lilies, and myrtle. The scent of the flowers suddenly seems cloying, overwhelming. The music falters, then dies completely. The sudden silence is absolute. Every eye in the chapel turns to Edward. The air becomes thick with anticipation. Edward, each word falling like a stone into still water. I cannot proceed with this union. Gasps and murmurs rise from the pews. Fans flutter with increased vigor. Ladies reach for their smelling salts. Gentlemen exchange glances of scandalized interest. Isabella feels the blood drain from her face as Edward steps away from her side. The distance between them, merely inches in physical space, seems to stretch into an unbridgeable chasm. Edward, turning toward the front row, Miss Charlotte Monroe, has captured my heart with her vivacity and youth. It is she whom I wish to make my Duchess. Charlotte rises from her seat, a flush of triumph coloring her cheeks as she meets Edward's gaze. The shock that ripples through the congregation is palpable. The vicar's prayer book slips from his stunned fingers to land with a thud on the stone floor. But none of these reactions penetrate the fog of humiliation and betrayal that envelops Isabella. The pain that stabs through her heart is physical in its intensity, stealing her breath and blurring her vision. Lord Monroe, bellowing, his face contorted in fury. This is outrageous. We have a contract, Richmond, a binding agreement between our families. Edward, coldly, with the confidence of a man whose title and wealth make him virtually untouchable. A contract I am willing to honor financially, Lord Monroe. Double the dowry will be transferred to your accounts by week's end as compensation. But I will not bind myself for life to a woman when I prefer another. Even you, with your mercantile background, must understand the value of choosing the superior option when it presents itself. The deliberate reference to Lord Monroe's trading past, a source of both wealth and social insecurity, is a calculated insult that further inflames the situation. Several of Lord Monroe's friends step forward in support. While the Richmond connection's close ranks around Edward, Isabella stands motionless amidst the growing chaos, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. The pitying glances from the assembled guests, the furious flush on her father's face, Charlotte's barely concealed look of victory, all of it swirls around her in a nightmarish tableau from which there is no escape. Edward, finally addressing her directly, his voice lowered so that only she and those nearest can hear, "Isabella, you are an accomplished woman, and I'm certain you will make some gentleman a suitable wife. But your sister possesses the youth and spirit better suited to be my Duchess. I'm certain you understand the practical considerations. As if her 22 years made her somehow less valuable than Charlotte's 17. As if the devotion she had cultivated, the skills she had perfected, the dreams she had nurtured, meant nothing compared to her sister's pretty face and flirtatious manner. A fierce, cold clarity washes over her. She will not give him the satisfaction of seeing her broken, with a dignity she hadn't known she possessed. Isabella unfastens the pearl necklace from her throat, his gift delivered that very morning, and holds it out to him. Isabella, her voice remarkably steady despite the earthquake within, "I believe this belongs with your chosen Duchess." Edward looks momentarily disconcerted by her composure, perhaps having expected tears or pleading. He takes the necklace automatically, seeming uncertain for the first time in the proceedings. Isabella then turns to Charlotte, who at least has the grace to lower her eyes momentarily. "Isabella," each word precise and controlled, "I wish you joy of your choice, sister. May it bring you all the happiness you deserve." The subtle emphasis on the last word is not lost on Charlotte, whose triumphant smile falters slightly. With that, Isabella gathers her elaborate train over one arm and turns away from the altar, head held high despite the tears threatening to spill. She walks back down the aisle alone. The same path she had traveled moments before as a bride now becomes her route of retreat. Each step is measured and dignified, despite the whispers that follow her like a poisonous fog. Isabella emerges from the church into the bright spring sunshine. She does not look back. The April light seems a mockery of the darkness that has descended upon her life. She has held her composure for so long, and now, away from the curious eyes of society, it finally shatters. Her steps falter and she stumbles, Martha rushing after her with a cloak to shield her from both the spring chill and prying eyes. Miss Isabella." Martha reaches her, wrapping a cloak around her shoulders. Isabella leans on her maid, her body trembling with a mixture of shock and pain. The tears that had been so carefully held back now spill onto her cheeks. Isabella, through trembling lips, "Not home. I cannot face those walls right now, knowing how father will look at me. As the daughter who failed in her only duty." Martha nodding frantically to the waiting carriage. "Please, let me take you home. Isabella, take me to Aunt Agatha's townhouse in London. She, at least, will understand what it means to be deemed insufficient by a man." Martha signals to the Monroe coachman, who had been waiting to transport the newly married couple to the wedding breakfast. He quickly brings the carriage around, helping Isabella inside, while Martha shields her from the first curious onlookers beginning to emerge from the chapel. As the carriage pulls away, Isabella catches a final glimpse through the window of Edward and Charlotte standing together on the steps, already looking like the perfect ducal couple. As the guests swarm around them with renewed excitement, the scandal would be enormous, but Edward's title and Charlotte's youth and beauty would eventually smooth over the impropriety. Society always forgave the young, the beautiful, and the powerful. The life Isabella had prepared for since birth had been stripped away in an instant, leaving her adrift in a society that would forever define her by this rejection. The skills she had acquired to be the perfect Duchess now seemed as useless as a ship's sail in a desert. At 26, Isabella Monroe had become a cautionary tale. The woman rejected by the Duke of Richmond, abandoned at the altar for her younger sister. The carriage journey from the Richmond estate to London is a blur of green countryside, gradually giving way to the sprawling metropolis. Isabella sits in numb silence, her wedding gown a cruel reminder of all she has lost. She is no longer a bride-to-be, no longer the future Duchess of Richmond. She is now something far worse in Victorian society, a woman rejected, an object of pity and gossip. Isabella watches the London buildings appear in the distance. The weight of her new reality settles upon her shoulders like a physical weight. By the time the carriage rolls onto the cobblestones of Grosvenor Square, Isabella has composed her exterior, though her heart still thunders with pain and humiliation. Martha helps straighten her veil and wipes away the traces of tears. "Martha, remember, miss, you've done nothing wrong." "Hold your head high," Isabella nods. She has made her decision. The path of duty is gone. Now there is only the uncertain path of her own making. The carriage comes to a stop before the dignified white facade of Lady Agatha Harcourt's London townhouse. Unlike most women of her station, Lady Agatha had never married, choosing instead to live by her own means after inheriting a substantial fortune from her father. At 62, she had long since ceased to care about society's whispers regarding her unmarried state. The carriage door opens, and Isabella finds herself face to face with Aunt Agatha herself. She stands tall and angular, with silver hair arranged in an unfashionably simple style. Her sharp eyes take in Isabella's wedding attire, the carriage devoid of wedding guests, and her niece's devastated expression, with the quick intelligence that had allowed her to navigate society on her own terms for decades. She pieces together the situation immediately. Aunt Agatha, absolutely disgraceful, absolutely disgraceful. Edward Richmond always was an opportunistic cad, just like his father before him. The old Duke tried to court me once, you know, before settling for his cousin's fortune instead. The elderly woman's outrage on her behalf provides the first balm to Isabella's wounded heart. At least someone believes the fault lay with Edward, not with her supposed inadequacies. Aunt Agatha, her arm around Isabella's waist. "Come, child. What you need is a change of clothes, a pot of strong tea, and the knowledge that this humiliation will eventually pass." She guides Isabella inside. The butler, a dignified man who had served Lady Agatha for 20 years, merely nods as if brides appearing on the doorstep in full wedding attire was a common occurrence. Butler, impassively, "Yes, my lady. And shall I have cook prepare a light luncheon?" Aunt Agatha firmly, "Indeed. And bring a tray of tea to my private sitting room immediately." Isabella is guided up the marble staircase. She looks at her aunt, at the protective arm around her waist. She has escaped her prison. The path ahead is unknown, but for the first time since that terrible day at the Richmond Chapel, she is looking forward rather than back. The sitting room is a sanctuary of quiet rebellion. Unlike the fashionable salons of Mayfair, with their flimsy silk wallpaper and ornate gilding, this room is a testament to comfort and a mind that values substance over ostentation. The walls are lined with books, not just for show, but reaching from floor to ceiling, their leather spines well worn. A generous fire crackles in the hearth, and a single, large armchair with a faded floral pattern sits beside it, a needlepoint frame resting on a nearby table. Isabella stands in the middle of the room, now dressed in a simple dark blue gown that belongs to her aunt. The intricate wedding dress, the source of so much pain and expectation, has been removed. Without the armor of silk and lace, she feels vulnerable, exposed. The butler Simmons enters with a tea tray and places it on a low table. He moves with a quiet dignity that suggests he is accustomed to his mistress's unusual household and its unorthodox guests. He looks at Isabella with a hint of kindness, a subtle acknowledgement of her plight that she finds more comforting than any gushing sympathy. He exits, closing the door softly behind him. Aunt Agatha, now seated in the large armchair, watches Isabella with her sharp silver eyes. She pours 2 cups of steaming tea into delicate porcelain cups, the steam rising in the quiet air. "Aunt Agatha." Her voice is calm, direct, and without a hint of pity. "Come, child. What you need is a change of clothes, a pot of strong tea, and the knowledge that this humiliation will eventually pass." Isabella moves toward the fire, her hands outstretched to the warmth, but her posture remains rigid. She wraps her arms around herself, as if to physically hold her shattered pieces together. "Isabella," her voice is barely a whisper, "how can I ever face society again? All of London will know by evening that Edward Richmond rejected me at the altar for Charlotte. How can it possibly pass, Aunt?" "I am ruined," Aunt Agatha scoffed, a brisk, no-nonsense sound. She sets down her spectacles to polish them vigorously with a small cloth. "Aunt Agatha ruined? Hardly. You are merely freed from a most unfortunate match. In time you'll see this as the blessing it truly is." Isabella's head snaps up, disbelief etched on her face. Her grey eyes, once so serene, are now filled with a bewildered hurt. "Isabella," her voice rises in disbelief, "a blessing to be humiliated before all of society? To watch my sister take the position I was raised to fill? How can you possibly call that a blessing?" Aunt Agatha's gaze is unwavering. She sets her spectacles back on her nose and takes a slow sip of tea. "Aunt Agatha, because I have lived long enough to recognize prison cells even when they're gilded with ducal coronets. Tell me truthfully, Isabella, did you love Edward Richmond? Not the idea of him, not the role he represented, but the man himself." The question catches Isabella off guard. She had spent so many years preparing to be Edward's Duchess that she had rarely considered the man apart from his title. She looks at her aunt, searching for an answer she hasn't yet found within herself. "Isabella, I thought I did, but I barely knew him. We were never permitted more than a few minutes of conversation, always supervised." Aunt Agatha, with a decisive nod, "Precisely. You were being sold into a marriage with a stranger, a handsome stranger, with an impressive title certainly, but a stranger nonetheless. And based on his actions today, a rather contemptible one at that. Isabella can't argue with that assessment, though the wound is still too fresh to find comfort in it. She sinks onto a small settee, the simple fabric a world away from the luxury of her home and the wedding gown that now lay in a discarded heap. "Isabella. But what am I to do now? I've been trained for one purpose since infancy, to be the Duchess of Richmond. Without that future I have nothing." Aunt Agatha, setting her teacup down with a finality that brooked no argument. "Nonsense. You have a first-rate education, a sharp mind, and the freedom to discover who Isabella Munro might be beyond the role that was assigned to her. Besides, you have me. And unlike your father, I value you for more than your marriageability." The words land on Isabella like a gentle rain, soothing the parched earth of her humiliation. She looks at her aunt, and for the first time since that terrible day, a flicker of something other than despair appears in her eyes. It is not hope, not yet, but a tentative curiosity about what her future might hold. She accepts the tea her aunt offers, the simple gesture, a quiet promise of a different kind of support. A new rhythm establishes itself at Aunt Agatha's townhouse. Isabella retreats into the sanctuary of her aunt's vast library. The room is a testament to the old woman's eclectic mind, with row upon row of leather-bound volumes offering escape from the reality of Isabella's situation. From the letters of sympathy that arrive daily, from her father's terse note announcing that Charlotte and Edward would marry within the month, from the gossip that undoubtedly circulates through every drawing room in London, the library becomes her refuge, its oak shelves towering from floor to ceiling, filled with everything from ancient philosophy to modern novels. Here, Isabella can lose herself for hours, curled in the window seat that overlooks the small but exquisitely maintained garden behind the townhouse. She reads not out of duty, but out of a desperate need to find a world where she is not defined by her humiliation. She finds herself gravitating toward the unconventional thinkers. She devours pages of Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, a work that would have been considered scandalous at her family's home. She reads the poetry of Percy Shelley, a radical whose rejection of social norms resonates with her. She loses herself in the romantic landscapes of Lord Byron, finding solace in his beautiful melancholy. Books demand nothing of her. No perfect posture, no flawless French pronunciation, no practiced smiles. They simply offer their worlds without judgment. One rainy afternoon, a week after what society has taken to calling the Richmond incident, Isabella is deeply engrossed in a novel, her finger between the pages to mark her place. She is in a world of her own, a world of ideas and passions that feel more real than the one she was born into. The heavy door to the library opens, and Aunt Agatha enters with unusual excitement. She is not carrying a book, but a sealed letter. Aunt Agatha, pulling open the heavy curtains to let what little daylight penetrates the London rain clouds, flood the room. You cannot hide among these dusty tomes forever. My dear, Isabella looks up from her book with a frown. Isabella, have no desire to be paraded before society. Nor do I wish to face society's pitying glances so soon, Aunt Agatha, seating herself in the leather armchair opposite Isabella's window seat. This is not about finding you another match. It is about showing London that Isabella Munro is neither broken nor in hiding. Besides, she holds up the letter. Aunt Agatha, have it on good authority that the Duke of Mendoza has arrived in London on diplomatic business, and I have secured us invitations to Lady Pembroke's literary salon this evening, where he will be in attendance. Isabella's frown deepens. Isabella, I have no desire to be paraded before another duke. And Aunt Agatha, I'm not suggesting you attend a grand ball or the opera, where you would be the center of attention. Lady Pembroke's salon is a small gathering of intellectuals and literary-minded aristocrats, precisely the sort of people who value conversation over gossip. Isabella hesitates, her natural inclination to withdraw, warring with the growing tedium of her self-imposed isolation. She looks at her book. For the first time, its pages feel less like an escape and more like a confinement. Isabella, a tentative, almost reluctant question. What would I even wear? I brought nothing with me except my wedding clothes. Aunt Agatha smiles, recognizing the question as tentative acceptance. Aunt Agatha, I've already instructed my dressmaker to send over several ready-made gowns that can be quickly altered to fit you. Nothing extravagant, simple, elegant attire suitable for a young woman of quality who values substance over ostentation. Isabella looks back at her book, then out the window at the now cleared London sky. She closes the book, keeping her finger between the pages to mark her place, and hands it back to her aunt. Isabella, very well. Aunt Agatha. Smiling, a look of quiet triumph in her eyes. Excellent. I have a feeling this will prove to be a most interesting evening. Isabella watches her aunt leave the room, then looks back at the empty space on the window seat where her book had been. The path ahead is unknown, but for the first time since that terrible day at the Richmond Chapel, she feels a flicker of anticipation. Fade to black. Despite her reluctance, Isabella finds herself dressed in a simple gown of deep blue silk. Its modest cut and minimal embellishment are a stark contrast to the elaborate wedding dress that now lies wrapped in tissue paper in the back of her wardrobe. Aunt Agatha had been insistent, and in truth, Isabella was beginning to tire of her own company and melancholy thoughts. The gown is new, a creation Aunt Agatha had insisted upon, claiming that Isabella had worn enough pastel colors to last a lifetime. Bold, not black for mourning, nor white for innocence, her aunt had declared when the dressmaker presented the design. A color that announces your transformation. The woman reflected back at Isabella barely resembles the bride who had stood in white just weeks earlier. There is a new awareness in her eyes, a slight lift to her chin that speaks of emerging strength rather than practiced poise. Lady Pembroke's salon is held in the tastefully appointed drawing room of her townhouse on Berkeley Square. Unlike the glittering balls of the season, where hundreds of guests crowded into ballrooms under blazing chandeliers, the salon is mercifully intimate. Only 20 guests have gathered to discuss literature and ideas rather than gossip and marriage prospects. Still, Isabella feels the weight of curious glances as she enters the room on her aunt's arm. Her story has undoubtedly reached every ear in London by now, embellished with each retelling. She keeps her chin high, drawing on reserves of dignity she hadn't known she possessed. Lady Pembroke, greeting them warmly, with a kindness in her eyes that suggests genuine sympathy rather than morbid curiosity. Lady Harcourt, Miss Monroe, how delightful that you could join us. We are discussing the merits of the Romantic poets this evening. Mr. Wordsworth's latest publication has sparked quite the debate. Isabella nods politely, steeling herself against the inevitable whispers. To her surprise, however, most guests seem genuinely engaged in the literary debate rather than in her scandal. Perhaps Aunt Agatha had been right about this particular gathering. She finds herself drawn into a conversation about Byron's Childe Harold with an elderly professor from Oxford and a middle-aged woman who has published several volumes of poetry under a male pseudonym. The discussion is stimulating, requiring enough concentration that Isabella momentarily forgets her personal troubles. She argues eloquently that Byron's portrayal of disillusionment speaks to a universal human experience rather than mere personal indulgence, a point that Professor Harrington dismisses as romantic nonsense. The debate grows lively, and for the first time in weeks, Isabella feels the spark of her intellect engaging with a world beyond her own heartache. A deep voice, with a distinct Spanish accent, comes from behind her. Spanish Duke Señorita, may I offer a different perspective on Lord Byron's work? Isabella turns to find herself looking up into the most striking face she has ever encountered. The man who addresses her stands tall, with olive skin, intelligent dark eyes, and features that appear to have been sculpted by a Renaissance master. His formal attire is impeccably tailored, but subtly different from English fashion, the cut more continental, the fabric richer in texture. Lady Pembroke, appearing at Isabella's side with remarkable speed. Your Grace, allow me to present Miss Isabella Monroe and her aunt, Lady Agatha Harcourt. Ladies, His Grace, Alejandro de Mendoza, Duke of Valencia Alejandro, bowing elegantly. The honor is mine. Unlike most English aristocrats who treat such gestures as perfunctory social requirements, there is a fluid grace to his movement that suggests genuine respect. Alejandro, his dark eyes lighting with intellectual engagement. I could not help but overhear your defense of Byron's Childe Harold. Your insights were most compelling. Isabella feels color rise to her cheeks. After weeks of being the subject of pitying glances and whispered conversations, to be addressed as an intellectual equal is unexpectedly refreshing. Isabella, you are too kind. Your Grace, I merely suggested that his portrayal of disillusionment speaks to universal human experience rather than mere personal indulgence. As Professor Harrington contends, Alejandro precisely, it is why it resonates across cultures. In Spain, we too understand the beauty of melancholy, what we call la tristeza dulce. Isabella, translating softly, sweet sadness. The Duke's eyebrows rise in surprise. Alejandro, you speak Spanish, Miss Monroe. Isabella, only a little, I'm afraid. I focused more on French and Italian in my studies, but I've always been fascinated by languages. Alejandro, with a smile that transforms his serious face, revealing a slight dimple in his left cheek, still impressive. Perhaps you might help me better understand some of your English idioms during my stay in London. I find myself frequently confused by your curious expressions, for the first time since her wedding day. Isabella feels the ghost of a genuine smile touch her lips. Isabella, I would be happy to assist you, Your Grace. Though I warn you that English is filled with contradictions. Alejandro, his dark eyes holding hers for a moment longer than propriety strictly allows. As are most worthwhile things in life, the conversation shifts to the Duke's diplomatic mission, negotiations regarding Spanish wine imports following recent changes in English tariffs. Unlike the superficial exchanges she is accustomed to with English gentlemen, who rarely discuss serious matters with young ladies, the Duke speaks to her as if her opinions have genuine value. Alejandro, explaining when she expresses surprise at his willingness to discuss trade policy with her. In Madrid, ladies frequently participate in political discussions. My own mother served as an unofficial advisor to the royal court on matters of international relations. I find the English custom of relegating women to discussions of weather and fashion rather limiting. Isabella, a small, knowing smile. Many English ladies would agree with you. Your Grace, though few English gentlemen seem to share your perspective, as the evening progresses, Isabella finds herself engaged in the most stimulating conversation she has experienced in years. The Duke is not only well-read, but possesses a perspective entirely different from the London gentleman she has known. He speaks of literature as something lived rather than merely studied, and he listens to her opinions with genuine interest, rather than polite tolerance. Alejandro, I must confess, Miss Monroe, when I agreed to attend this salon, I expected polite academic discussion. I did not expect to find a kindred spirit, Isabella. Her voice is soft, honest, nor did I. It has been refreshing, Alejandro. His voice is low, almost a murmur. Perhaps you would consider showing me the British Museum tomorrow. I am told their collection of classical antiquities is unrivaled, and I would value a knowledgeable companion. Before Isabella can respond, Aunt Agatha appears at her side. Having observed the extended conversation with evident satisfaction, Aunt Agatha, my niece, would be delighted. Your Grace, shall we say 11 o'clock? I would of course accompany them as chaperone. Alejandro, bowing over Lady Agatha's hand, say would be honoured. Until tomorrow then, ladies. Later, as their carriage rolls back toward Grosvenor Square through the gas-lit London streets, Isabella turns to her aunt. Isabella, a note of both gratitude and disbelief in her voice. That was rather presumptuous of you. And Aunt Agatha, with a satisfied smile, nonsense. I merely accepted an invitation that you were clearly inclined to accept yourself. Besides, did you not notice how every lady in that room envied your extended conversation with the handsome Duke? Lady Harrington's daughter looked positively green with jealousy. Isabella, I am not interested in making anyone envious, aunt, nor am I looking for another attachment so soon after. Aunt Agatha finishes for her. After being fortunate enough to escape marriage to that unprincipled Richmond boy, the Duke of Mendoza seems a man of genuine character and intellect. I'm not suggesting you marry him, my dear, merely that you allow yourself to remember there are worthwhile men in this world, men who see value beyond youth and a pretty face. Isabella turns to gaze out the carriage window at the gas-lit streets of London, the evening fog giving the lamps a ghostly halo. For the first time since her humiliation, she has passed an evening without dwelling on Edward's rejection or Charlotte's betrayal. The Duke's interest had been in her mind, her thoughts, not in her family connections or her suitability as a duchess. Isabella, softly, her voice filled with wonder. He didn't mention it, you know. The scandal. He must have heard. Aunt Agatha. Everyone has. But he spoke to me as if... Isabella finishes the thought. As if you were a woman of intelligence and substance, rather than merely a jilted bride. Perhaps because that is precisely what he saw. The carriage turns onto Grosvenor Square, the horses' hooves echoing on the cobblestones. As they approach Aunt Agatha's townhouse, Isabella feels something stir within her. Not happiness precisely, but a tentative curiosity about what the future might hold. Perhaps Aunt Agatha was right. Perhaps it was time to step back into the world, not as the woman rejected by the Duke of Richmond, but simply as Isabella Monroe, with her own thoughts, her own interests, and possibly her own future. That night, for the first time since the wedding day, Isabella sleeps without dreaming of the chapel and Edward's cold eyes. Instead, her dreams are filled with the British Museum's marble halls and a voice with a Spanish accent discussing Byron's poetry. When she wakes, the heavy weight of humiliation has lightened just slightly, making room for something she had not expected to feel again so soon: anticipation. The morning dawns bright and clear, as if London has decided to put aside its usual grey demeanour in honour of the day. As she prepares for her visit to the British Museum with Alejandro, Isabella finds her thoughts unusually serene. Her stomach flutters with a nervous anticipation that has nothing to do with the prospect of facing society again. She stands at her bedroom window, watching the morning light gradually illuminate London's rooftops. She rings for Martha. Isabella, a small, decisive smile on her face. The blue walking dress, I think. And my hair in a simpler style than yesterday. We're going to the British Museum. Martha, unable to hide her pleasure. Yes, miss, and might I say you look better this morning. There's some colour in your cheeks. Isabella catches her own reflection in the looking-glass and is surprised to see that Martha is right. The hollow-eyed ghost who had haunted her aunt's guest room for the past weeks has begun to recede, replaced by a woman with a spark of life returning to her grey eyes. Isabella, it's just a museum visit, Martha. An educational outing, nothing more. Martha. A knowing smile suggests she isn't fooled. Of course, miss. Still, it's good to see you interested in something again. That's all I meant. By the time 11 o'clock approaches, Isabella is standing in the entrance hall, outwardly composed but inwardly nervous in a way that had nothing to do with the prospect of facing society. The Duke of Valencia has awakened something in her that she had thought permanently extinguished by Edward's rejection: curiosity about another person, and perhaps more surprisingly, curiosity about herself. The door knocker sounds precisely at 11. Isabella smooths her skirts and takes a deep breath. Whatever happens next, whether this outing leads to friendship, something more, or nothing at all, she is, for the first time in her life, facing a day that has not been mapped out for her since birth. There is terror in such freedom, certainly, but also an exhilarating sense of possibility. The butler opens the door to reveal Alejandro de Mendoza, Duke of Valencia, standing on the doorstep in mourning attire, his carriage waiting at the curb. As he bows over her hand in greeting, his dark eyes meet hers with what seems like genuine pleasure at seeing her again. Alejandro, Miss Monroe, I've been looking forward to our expedition. Isabella's, have I, your grace. Behind her, Aunt Agatha descends the stairs, ready for her role as chaperone. A knowing smile plays at the corners of her mouth as she observes the way the Duke looks at her niece. As they step out into the spring sunshine, Isabella realizes that for the first time since that terrible day at the Richmond Chapel, she is looking forward rather than back. In T, British Museum. The British Museum is a bustling, crowded place filled with people of all classes and stations. It is a world away from the secluded halls of aristocracy that Isabella has always known. She walks beside Alejandro, her aunt trailing at a respectable distance, and she finds herself surprisingly at ease. Alejandro. The collection of Greek sculpture is rumored to be particularly fine. What are your thoughts on classicism, Miss Monroe? Isabel, I find myself drawn more to the Renaissance masters. Their art seems to possess a greater humanity. The classics, while beautiful, sometimes feel cold. Alejandro, smiling, he turns to her. Cold? I had not thought a lady of your refined education would use such a word. Isabella, a touch of humor in her voice. My education, like my life, has been very well ordered, your grace. I find myself now more interested in things that are perhaps less so. They spend hours wandering the museum halls. The conversation flows easily, effortlessly, from the history of ancient Egypt to the philosophy behind Roman art. Alejandro speaks to her not as a beautiful woman he wishes to impress, but as a mind he wishes to engage with. He listens to her opinions with a genuine interest that she finds intoxicating. He asks her what she thinks, not what she was taught to think. He questions her on her own interpretations, not on what is considered correct. He makes her feel, perhaps for the first time, that her mind is a valuable asset, not a tool for her social advancement. Alejandro, as they stand before a massive Roman statue. This statue was not created to be a perfect, idealized form. It was created to tell a story. Its flaws, its humanity, is what gives it its true beauty. He looks at her as he says this, a deep, meaningful look that she understands. She had been raised to be a perfect, idealized form, and now, in her flaws and her shattered life, he finds a different kind of beauty. The visit to the British Museum marks the beginning of a transformation in Isabella's life. What began as a simple cultural outing evolves into a series of encounters that gradually rekindle her spirit. As April's showers give way to May's gentle sunshine, Isabella finds herself stepping further from the shadow of her humiliation and into a life she has never imagined possible. Over the following weeks, London society observes with growing interest as Miss Isabella Munro is frequently seen in the company of the Spanish Duke. Their outings, always properly chaperoned by Lady Harcourt, become the subject of speculation in drawing rooms across Mayfair. The very society that had pitied Isabella now watches with curiosity as she appears at select gatherings, with the distinguished foreigner at her side. Isabella and Alejandro stroll through Kew Gardens with Aunt Agatha following at a discreet distance. The spring blooms are at their peak, filling the air with fragrance and painting the landscape in vibrant colors that seem to reflect Isabella's gradually reawakening spirit. Alejandro, as they pause beside a beautiful arrangement of exotic flowers. In Spain, we have a saying, vale más un buen entendimiento que grandes riquezas. A good understanding is worth more than great riches. Isabella, watching a butterfly alight on a nearby bloom. That's lovely. Though I imagine many in English society would disagree, Alejandro, with a wry smile, as would many in Spanish society, I'm afraid. The nobility is not so different across borders. I'm afraid we are all taught to value lineage and fortune above character, Isabella, and yet you seem to have escaped that particular lesson. Your Grace, Alejandro, his expression grows serious, perhaps because I learned early that titles offer no protection against life's tragedies. My parents died when I was 14, a boating accident off the coast of Valencia. I inherited the dukedom far too young, with only my grandfather's guidance to see me through. Isabella, softly, touched by this glimpse into his past. I'm so sorry, Alejandro, absently twirling a fallen blossom between his fingers. It shaped me, made me understand that life is unpredictable and precious. We must seize happiness where we find it, not where convention dictates it should be. He turns to her, his gaze gentle and serious. Alejandro, boldly for a man of his station, may I be bold, Miss Munro? Isabella, you may Alejandro, I know of your recent situation. London talks of little else, I'm afraid. But I want you to know that I see it as the Duke of Richmond's great misfortune, not yours. Isabella stops walking, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Of course he knew. Everyone knew. She had foolishly begun to hope that perhaps he had somehow missed the gossip, or that he didn't care about it. Now the humiliation she had gradually been setting aside threatens to engulf her once more. Isabella, stiffly, retreating behind the polite mask she had perfected over years of training. You need not offer kind falsehoods. Your Grace, I'm well aware of how society views a rejected bride. Alejandro, firmly, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that makes it impossible to look away. I offer no falsehoods, only my own observation that a man who would humiliate a woman of your intelligence and grace reveals his own profound lack of judgment, not yours. His words, spoken with such conviction, break through a barrier Isabella hadn't realized she'd built. For weeks, she had carried the unspoken belief that she must somehow have been lacking, too plain, too serious, Too old at 26 compared to Charlotte's 17 years. Isabella, whispering, blinking back unexpected tears. Thank you, Alejandro reaches for her gloved hand, a gesture that would have been improper had Aunt Agatha not been distracted by an exotic plant several yards away. Alejandro in Spain. We also believe that sometimes fate leads us through darkness, only to reveal a brighter path. Perhaps your Richmond was merely an obstacle on your true journey. The warmth of his hand through her glove sends an unfamiliar but not unwelcome sensation through Isabella. She should withdraw her hand. Propriety demands it. But for once, she allows herself to defy convention. They stand thus for a moment, connected by that simple touch, while butterflies dance around the roses above them, and London society seems very far away. Isabella is still dwelling on that moment in the garden with Alejandro, when Jenkins, Aunt Agatha's butler, enters the library where she has been attempting to read. Jenkins, a letter for you, miss. He presents it on a silver salver. Isabella recognizes the handwriting immediately, her mother's elegant script. With trepidation, she breaks the seal, wondering what news from home awaits her. The letter begins with familiar formalities, but quickly comes to its purpose. The Countess of Harrington is hosting her annual grand ball the following evening, and Lady Monroe expects Isabella to attend with Aunt Agatha. More concerning still, the letter mentions that Edward and Charlotte will be there, their first public appearance as husband and wife since their hastily arranged wedding 2 weeks prior. Isabella feels the old, familiar knot of dread tightening in her stomach. The fear of public humiliation returns, sharp and visceral. Isabella telling her aunt over luncheon, her voice tight with a newfound panic, I cannot possibly attend. They will be there as husband and wife. Aunt Agatha setting down her fork with a decisive click against fine porcelain. Precisely why you must go. If you hide away, you confirm every whisper that you are devastated beyond recovery. Besides, she leans forward, her voice conspiratorial. Aunt Agatha have it on good authority that the Duke of Mendoza will be in attendance. Isabella looks up, surprised. Isabella, how do you know that? Aunt Agatha, because I took the liberty of ensuring he received an invitation. Lady Harrington and I have been friends since we were girls. She was quite amenable to adding the Spanish envoy to her guest list, especially when I mentioned his interest in English customs. Isabella shakes her head at her aunt's transparent matchmaking. Isabella, even if he attends, I'm not certain I can face Edward and Charlotte together. The humiliation is still too raw. Aunt Agatha, her voice is gentler now. My dear, there will always be a reason to avoid facing them if you search for one. But consider this. Would you rather they believe they've broken your spirit? Or would you prefer to show them that Isabella Monroe is made of stronger stuff than they imagined? Isabella stands before her mirror that evening, examining her reflection with critical eyes. Her gown is new, a creation of deep crimson silk that Aunt Agatha had insisted upon. Bold, not black for mourning, nor white for innocence, her aunt had declared. A color that announces your transformation. The woman reflected back at Isabella barely resembles the bride who had stood in white just weeks earlier. There is a new awareness in her eyes, a slight lift to her chin that speaks of emerging strength rather than practiced poise. The crimson silk complements her chestnut hair and fair skin, making her appear more vivid, more present than the watercolor pastels she had always worn. When they arrive at Harrington House, Isabella takes a steadying breath before entering the ballroom. The grand space glitters with hundreds of candles, illuminating London's elite in their finest attire. The moment she appears in the doorway on Aunt Agatha's arm, conversations falter and heads turn in her direction. Aunt Agatha murmuring, "Courage, my dear. Remember who you are becoming, not who you were told to be." Isabella nods, scanning the room until her eyes find what they unconsciously seek. Alejandro standing near a column, his formal attire distinctly Spanish in cut and style. When he sees her, his face lights with a smile that somehow makes the whispers around them fade into insignificance. He crosses the room, his long strides confident, and bows before her. "Alejandro!" His voice is low, meant only for her ears. "Miss Monroe, you are a vision tonight." "Isabella, thank you." "Your Grace." She is suddenly aware of every eye upon them, of the assessment and speculation taking place behind fans and raised champagne glasses. Alejandro, offering his arm. "Would you do me the honor of reserving the first waltz for me?" Before she can respond, a familiar voice cuts through her consciousness. "Edward, Isabella, how unexpected to see you here." Edward Richmond stands before her, Charlotte on his arm. Her sister is resplendent in a gown of pale green silk, her golden curls arranged elaborately beneath a diamond tiara, the Richmond family heirloom that should have adorned Isabella's head. Isabella feels as if all the air has been pulled from the room. This is the moment she has dreaded, the confrontation she has imagined in countless restless nights. Yet now that it has arrived, she is surprised to find herself steadier than expected. "Isabella," with perfect composure, dropping into a flawless curtsy. "Your Grace, Duchess, I trust married life agrees with you both." Edward has the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, while Charlotte merely tightens her grip on his arm, her triumphant smile barely concealed. "Edward, indeed. London has been abuzz with talk of your friendship with the Spanish Duke." Isabella feels Alejandro stiffen beside her. "Isabella, allow me to make introductions. Your Grace, may I present Alejandro de Mendoza, Duke of Valencia." "Your Grace, the Duke and Duchess of Richmond." The men exchange terse bows, sizing each other up with the wariness of natural rivals. The contrast between them is striking. Edward, fair and classically English with his golden hair and blue eyes. Alejandro, dark and intense, with the unmistakable pride of Spanish nobility evident in his bearing. "Alejandro, understand congratulations are in order. Though I confess English marriage customs continue to surprise me. In Spain, we consider a man's word his bond, especially in matters of honor. The subtle rebuke is not lost on anyone present." Edward's face flushes, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "Edward, I assure you, Your Grace, that English honor is no less stringent. Sometimes circumstances require adaptations." Alejandro, with dangerous politeness. "How fascinating. In my country, we have another saying. A man who changes his mind as often as his shirt deserves trust not even at Mass." Charlotte's eyes narrow. "Charlotte, perhaps some Spanish lessons would improve your English." "Your Grace, your accent makes understanding difficult," Edward murmurs a warning to Charlotte. But Isabella feels a surge of unexpected strength. The sister who betrayed her, the man who humiliated her, they suddenly seem smaller than she remembered, less intimidating. Isabella, calmly, directly to Charlotte. "His Grace speaks 5 languages fluently, Duchess." "How many do you speak now?" Charlotte's face flushes with anger. But before she can respond, the orchestra begins the opening notes of a waltz, Alejandro offering his arm to Isabella. "I believe this is our dance. Miss Monroe," as he leads her onto the floor. Isabella feels a weight lifting from her shoulders. The couple they leave behind no longer hold power over her happiness. Whatever pain they had caused remains, but its sting has lessened. "Alejandro," as they take their positions for the waltz, "you handled that with remarkable grace." Isabella had an excellent example of dignity before me. As they move across the floor, Isabella becomes aware of something shifting within her, a final release of the life she had been prepared for, and an opening to possibilities she had never permitted herself to imagine. The gaze of society follows them, noting how well they move together. How the Spanish Duke looks at his partner with undisguised admiration. Alejandro, his voice is low enough that only she can hear. "There is something I must tell you. My diplomatic mission concludes at the end of this month. I will be returning to Spain." Isabella feels a sharp pang of disappointment. "Isabella, so soon?" Alejandro, he guides her through the steps with confident ease. Yes, but before I go, there is something I must ask you. In these weeks, I have come to admire you greatly, Isabella. Your intelligence, your resilience, your gentle heart. I find myself unable to contemplate returning to Spain without knowing if you might consider a future there. Isabella nearly misses a step. Isabella, your Grace, are you suggesting... Alejandro gently interrupting. I am suggesting nothing yet. Only asking if you might be open to the possibility of a life very different from the one you had planned. Spain is not England. Valencia is not Richmond, and I am not the man you were promised to since birth. Isabella, a small smile touches her lips. No, you are nothing like him. Thank heaven. Alejandro's eyes widen at her response. Then crinkle with pleasure. Alejandro, does that mean you might consider my offer? Isabella, I believe it means I would like to hear more about this offer. As the waltz ends, Alejandro bows over her hand. Alejandro with a promise in his eyes. Tomorrow. Then, for the remainder of the evening, Isabella moves through the ballroom with a new lightness. She notes the speculative glances, hears the whispers that follow her, sees Edward watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. None of it matters. For the first time in her life, Isabella Munro is contemplating a future shaped by her own choices rather than by agreements made over her cradle. The morning dawns bright and clear, as if London has decided to put aside its usual grey demeanour in honour of the decision Isabella faces. As she prepares for her walk in Hyde Park with Alejandro, she finds her thoughts unusually serene. Her nerves are taut, but in a way that has nothing to do with the prospect of facing society again. She is ready well before the appointed hour, dressed in a walking ensemble of deep blue that complements her eyes. She paces the drawing room, rehearsing possible responses to what she suspects will be a formal proposal. Aunt Agatha, observing her niece with satisfaction. You seem remarkably composed for a woman about to receive a proposal. Isabella, reminding her aunt. Though her heart quickens, we don't know that's what he intends. Aunt Agatha, raising an eyebrow. Don't we? The man has called upon you nearly every day for 3 weeks and looks at you as though you've personally hung the moon and stars. If that isn't a man on the verge of a proposal, I've misread every romance since King George was in short pants. Isabella smiles at her aunt's characteristically blunt assessment. Isabella, even if you're right, I'm not certain what my answer should be. Spain is so far away, and so different from everything I know. Aunt Agatha, which might be precisely what you need. You were molded since infancy to be the perfect English Duchess. Perhaps it's time to discover who Isabella Munro might become when freed from those expectations. Before Isabella can respond, Jenkins announces the arrival of the Duke of Valencia. Isabella smooths her skirts, takes a deep breath, and prepares to face a future she has never imagined. When Alejandro enters the drawing room, Isabella is struck once again by how his presence affects her. It isn't merely his handsome features or his title. She has been raised among handsome aristocrats all her life. Rather, it is the quality of his attention, the sense that when he speaks with her, she is truly seen. Alejandra Miss Munro, Lady Harcourt. You both look radiant this morning, Aunt Agatha, with unusual warmth. Flattery will get you everywhere, Your Grace. Now shall we proceed to the park? I understand it's particularly lovely this time of year. They walk through Hyde Park at a leisurely pace, and Agatha maintaining a discreet distance behind them, close enough for propriety, far enough for private conversation. The park is filled with fashionable Londoners taking their morning exercise, many of whom observe the trio with undisguised curiosity. Isabella, when they reach a secluded bend in the path overlooking the Serpentine, I've been thinking about what you said last night, Alejandro, and I have been thinking of little else. Perhaps I was too forward. If so, Isabella, interrupting gently. No, you weren't too forward. In fact, your honesty has been refreshing. All my life I've lived with careful words and hidden meanings. You speak directly, and I value that more than I can express. Alejandro smiles, visibly relieved. Alejandro, then, may I continue to be direct? When Isabella nods, he reaches into his coat and withdraws a small leather case. Alejandro. He opens the case to reveal an exquisite ring, a deep blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds. This belonged to my mother. In Spain, we consider sapphires symbols of loyalty and truth. Values I have found abundantly in you, Isabella. He takes her hand, his expression solemn yet filled with warmth. Alejandro did not come to England seeking a bride. I came on diplomatic business, expecting nothing more than tedious negotiations and formal dinners. Instead, I found a woman of extraordinary character, intelligent, kind, and stronger than even she knows. Isabella feels tears gathering in her eyes as he continues. Alejandro, know this is sudden. I know Spain is not your home, and that my proposal comes at a time when you are still healing from betrayal. But I also know with a certainty I cannot explain that you are the woman I wish to share my life with. He kneels before her there on the gravel path, heedless of his immaculate trousers. Alejandro, his gaze unwavering. Isabella Monroe, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Not because of arrangements made in your childhood, but because we choose each other freely, as equals. Time seems to still around them, the gentle lap of water against the lake shore, the distant calls of children playing, the rustle of leaves overhead, all fade into insignificance as Isabella looks into the eyes of the man before her. In that moment of perfect clarity, Isabella realizes that the answer had been forming within her heart since their first meeting. Alejandro had entered her life when she believed herself defined by rejection, and had instead helped her discover her own worth beyond the role she had been raised to fill. The woman who had been betrayed at the altar was not the same woman who stands in the park today. In just a few short weeks, Isabella had begun to shed the layers of conditioning that had shaped her entire existence. With Alejandro, she has glimpsed the possibility of a life built on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than duty and social expectation. Isabella, her voice is a soft whisper. Yes. Then, more firmly, Isabella, yes, I will marry you. Alejandro. His face transforms with joy as he rises to slip the ring onto her finger. It fits perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand alone. Alejandro, raising her gloved hand to his lips, you have made me the happiest of men. From behind them comes the sound of applause. Aunt Agatha, abandoning all pretense of not eavesdropping, approaches with a broad smile. Aunt Agatha, well done. Your Grace, I was beginning to fear I'd need to drop more obvious hints. Isabella, blushing furiously. Aunt Agatha, what? I'm an old woman with no time for unnecessary delays. Now shall we discuss wedding plans? I suggest a small, elegant ceremony before you depart for Spain. No sense giving the gossips more time to wag their tongues. As they walk back through the park, arm in arm, Isabella is conscious of the curious glances directed their way. By evening, all of London will know that the woman rejected by one duke has captured the heart of another, more distinguished one. The narrative is too romantic, too satisfying for even the most cynical socialites to resist. But for Isabella, the true story is far more significant than any gossip could capture. In choosing Alejandro, and in being chosen by him, she has taken the first step toward defining herself on her own terms. The journey ahead will lead her far from the path that had been laid out for her since birth, across oceans to a land she has never seen. Yet as she looks up at the man beside her, she feels not fear but anticipation. The life awaiting her in Spain is unknown, but it will be her own, a life chosen rather than assigned, a future built on love rather than duty. That night, for the first time since the wedding day, Isabella sleeps without dreaming of the chapel and Edward's cold eyes. Instead, her dreams are filled with the British Museum's marble halls and a voice with a Spanish accent discussing Byron's poetry. When she wakes, the heavy weight of humiliation has lightened just slightly, making room for something she had not expected to feel again so soon: anticipation. The morning of Isabella's wedding to Alejandro dawns cold and clear, with a winter sun casting long shadows across the cobblestones of Hanover Square. Unlike the elaborate preparations for her first wedding, this morning is marked by a calm intimacy. Martha helps her into a simple gown of ivory silk, new, with no associations to her previous wedding, while Aunt Agatha supervises the arrangement of orange blossoms in her hair. No veil this time, Isabella had decided. I want nothing hidden between us. She stands for a moment before the looking glass, her reflection serene. The woman who gazes back at her has found a quiet strength she didn't know she possessed. Her hands, which had trembled with fear on her first wedding day, are now steady with purpose. Martha, you look beautiful, my lady. So, at peace. Isabella, a genuine smile lights up her eyes. I am. The chapel is modestly filled with a select group of London's elite, Aunt Agatha's friends, a few diplomatic associates of Alejandro, and a small representation from the Monroe family. Lord and Lady Monroe sit stiffly in the front pew, their expressions a mixture of resignation and calculation. Charlotte is conspicuously absent, having pleaded a sudden illness that prevented her attendance. As the organ plays, a melody both joyful and solemn, Isabella walks down the aisle on her father's arm, her step sure and her heart steady. Unlike the first time she had traversed this path, today she moves not toward a stranger and a duty, but toward a man she has chosen, and who has chosen her. Alejandro waits at the altar, his dark eyes never leaving her face as she approaches. When Lord Monroe places her hand in his, Isabella feels not the transfer of property from one man to another, but the joining of equals embarking on a shared journey. The ceremony proceeds without interruption or hesitation. When the priest asks, "Who giveth this woman to be married to this man?" Lord Monroe answers with formal correctness, but Isabella knows the truth. She gives herself freely and with clear eyes as she speaks her vows. Her gaze never leaves Alejandro's face, the face of a man who has chosen her for herself, not for duty or bloodlines or social expectations. When he slips the gold band onto her finger to join the sapphire engagement ring, his hands are steady and warm. Alejandro in his accented English, "With this ring I thee wed." He then adds, softly in Spanish, his eyes filled with a love that makes her heart ache with joy, "Alejandro, con esta sortija, te entrego mi corazón y mi vida." With this ring I give you my heart and my life. Isabella's eyes fill with tears. This is the promise she has been waiting for her entire life. Weeks later, a strong wind whips at the sails of the ship as it surges forward through the grey-blue waters of the English Channel. It is a large, well-appointed vessel, but Isabella feels no sense of confinement on its deck. She stands beside Alejandro, watching the English coastline recede behind them. Growing smaller with each passing minute, the June breeze carries the scent of salt and promise, ruffling the loose tendrils of hair that have escaped her bonnet. She is dressed in a warm traveling cloak, her husband's arm secure around her waist. Alejandro, his voice is low, meant only for her. Any regrets? Isabella turns to look at him, this man who entered her life when all seemed lost, and showed her a world of possibilities she had never imagined. In the weeks since their first meeting, she has discovered in him not only a keen intellect and an honorable character, but a tenderness that has helped heal the wounds of her humiliation. Isabella, with perfect honesty, none. England was my past. You are my future. As the ship catches the wind and surges forward toward the Mediterranean, Isabella feels a profound sense of peace. The path that had seemed so fixed from her infancy has taken an unexpected turn, leading her not to the life she had been prepared for, but to the one she was meant to live. The southern Spanish sun would be different from London's gentle light. The language, customs, and expectations of her new homeland would challenge her in ways she had never anticipated. But with Alejandro by her side, Isabella faces this new chapter not with fear, but with excitement. She had entered the world as a girl promised to a duke since birth. She is leaving England as a woman who has chosen her own destiny. And in that choice, Isabella Munro, now Isabella de Mendoza, Duchess of Valencia, has found not just love, but her true self. Narrator V.O. Dear listener, sometimes life places us on unexpected paths, moments when everything we planned seems to crumble. Like Isabella, you too may be facing your own version of an empty altar or a broken promise. But remember, the destiny others have mapped out for us isn't always the one that will bring us true happiness. Often, it's precisely in our moments of greatest pain that the doors to our true purpose open. Perhaps today you're feeling the weight of rejection, the sting of betrayal, or simply the exhaustion of following expectations that aren't truly yours. Know that this pain isn't the end of your story. It's merely a necessary chapter for your transformation. Just as Isabella found the strength to rebuild her identity and discover a deeper, more authentic love, you too carry within you a resilience you may not yet know. Your moments of greatest vulnerability can become the foundation of your greatest strength. As the Duchess of Valencia discovered, sometimes our greatest gifts come disguised as our greatest disappointments. A walk to remember team.